Most home cooks own a full knife block, 8 blades, sometimes more, fanned out on the counter like they are ready for surgery. But if you actually watch someone cook dinner on a Tuesday night, they reach for the same 1 or 2 knives every single time. The rest just sit there, slowly dulling in their slots. And here is the thing. Every knife in that block was designed to solve a very specific problem. The issue is not which knives you own. It is that most people have been reaching for the wrong one without even knowing it. The chef's knife is where it all starts. It handles roughly 80 to 90% of everything you do in a kitchen: chopping onions, mincing garlic, slicing meat, breaking down vegetables. But here is the part most people miss. There is no single chef's knife. There are at least 3 distinct versions, and each one wants to be used completely differently. The German version, the kind made by companies like Wüsthof and Zwilling J.A. Henkel's in the city of Solingen, has a deeply curved belly, a thick spine, and real heft in the hand. Solingen has been making blades since the Middle Ages and was stamping "Made in Solingen" on its knives as far back as 1571, one of the earliest trademarks in the world. That continuous curve along the bottom of the blade is not decorative. It is engineered for a rocking motion, where you keep the tip planted on the cutting board and rock the heel up and down like a hinge. That is the technique you have seen on every cooking show for decades. The French version, shaped in the old cutlery capital of Thiers, has a straighter edge that stays flat longer before sweeping up to a fine, sharp point. That flatter profile is built for a push cut, where you drive the blade forward and down through the food rather than rocking. It is a different motion entirely. Then there is the Japanese answer, the gyuto, which literally translates to cow sword. When Japan opened to the West in the Meiji era and started eating beef, Japanese blacksmiths, many of them former sword makers, took the Western chef's knife shape and rebuilt it thinner, lighter, and from much harder steel. German knives typically sit around 56 to 58 on the Rockwell hardness scale. Japanese gyutos run 60 or higher, sometimes as high as 67. That gap might not sound like much, but it changes everything. Harder steel can be ground to a thinner, more acute edge, which means cleaner cuts through delicate food with less effort. But harder also means more brittle. Hit a bone with a gyuto and you might chip the blade clean off, where a German knife would simply bend and keep going. The typical chef's knife runs about 8 inches, and choosing between these 3 is not about quality. It is about which cutting motion your hands already know. The chef's knife tries to do everything, but in the 1940s, Japan designed a blade that was honest about what it could not do. The Santoku was born in post-war Japan at a moment when home kitchens were absorbing Western ingredients for the first time. Families needed a single knife that could handle meat, fish, and vegetables without switching between traditional Japanese blades for each one. The name Santoku means 3 virtues, though nobody fully agrees on which 3. Some say it refers to the 3 ingredients: meat, fish, and vegetables. Others say it describes the 3 cutting techniques: slicing, dicing, and mincing. A third, less common reading holds that the 3 means the blade itself, the tip, the belly, and the heel. What is not disputed is the shape. The Santoku is shorter than a chef's knife, usually 5 to 8 inches, with a flat cutting edge and a blunt, rounded nose where the spine curves down sharply to meet the edge instead of tapering to a point. That flat profile means it is designed for a straight up and down push cut, not a rocking motion. Many Santokus also carry a row of oval dimples along the blade face called a Granton edge, which helps reduce sticking when slicing through moist ingredients. The Santoku's breakout in the United States is a genuinely odd story. The knife was essentially unknown in America until the early 2000s, when Rachel Ray started using a Wüsthof Granton Edge Santoku on her show 30-Minute Meals. Sales went through the roof almost overnight, and within a few years, every major knife company, Asian and Western alike, was racing to release their own version. So the Santoku sitting on a lot of American kitchen counters today is the German interpretation of the Japanese interpretation of the French chef's knife. 3 countries and a cooking show deep. The catch is that many home cooks rock a Santoku the same way they would rock a German chef's knife, which is exactly the wrong motion for its flat edge. The Santoku handles vegetables well enough, but for vegetable work specifically, Japan already had something purpose-built. The nakiri is a Japanese vegetable knife with a thin, flat, rectangular blade and a completely blunt tip, typically around 6.5 to 7 inches long. Its defining feature is a dead flat cutting edge that makes full contact with the board on every single stroke. Push cut a carrot or a thick piece of daikon radish with a nakiri, and the entire edge lands at once. No rocking, no uncut skin hanging at the bottom, no second pass needed. The blade is ground exceptionally thin, often weighing barely more than a smartphone, which means it glides through dense root vegetables without wedging them apart the way a heavier knife would. In Japanese home cooking, where vegetables have traditionally formed the foundation of most meals and presentation matters as much as flavor, a blade that delivers perfectly clean, uniform cuts in one motion is not a luxury. It is a basic tool. But here is the critical thing most people get wrong. The nakiri looks exactly like a small cleaver. It is absolutely not one. It has no heft, no thickness in the spine, and no business anywhere near a bone. Treat it like a cleaver, and you will snap the blade clean in half. And speaking of cleavers, this is probably the most misunderstood knife in the world. When Western cooks see a Chinese cleaver hanging in a kitchen, they assume it is a heavy bone-splitting butcher tool. It is the exact opposite. The Chinese cleaver, properly called a kai dao, which literally translates to vegetable knife, is thin, surprisingly light, and functions as the Chinese equivalent of a chef's knife. In a traditional Chinese home kitchen, this one blade does nearly everything: slicing, mincing, shredding cabbage, crushing garlic with the flat of the blade, and scooping chopped ingredients off the cutting board using the tall blade face as a bench scraper. Food writer Fuchsia Dunlop has described the everyday kai dao as unexpectedly light and dexterous, as suited for slicing a small shallot as a great piece of meat, and used by everyone from professional chefs in restaurant kitchens to elderly home cooks preparing a family meal. The one knife for everything tradition grew partly from historical necessity. Fuel was scarce across much of China, so food was cut into small pieces to cook quickly over intense heat, and a single well-chosen blade handled every cut in the preparation. Chinese cooks developed an extraordinary vocabulary of techniques around the kai dao. In the Sichuan culinary tradition alone, there are reportedly more than 30 distinct terms for different cuts and cutting motions. Now, there is a separate heavy Chinese bone cleaver, sometimes called a gu dao, that does exist specifically for splitting through joints and hard cartilage. But that is a completely different tool, with a thick spine and serious weight behind it. Confusing the two is one of the most common and most expensive mistakes in a kitchen. Try to hack through a chicken thigh with a thin kai dao, and you will crack the blade. Try to finely slice ginger with a heavy bone cleaver, and you will crush it flat. The kai dao handles everything in a Chinese kitchen, but some jobs need a blade small enough to hold like a pencil. The paring knife is tiny, usually about 2.5 to 4 inches, and that size is the entire point. It is designed for in-hand precision work, where a larger knife would be clumsy and dangerous. Peeling apples, hulling strawberries, deveining shrimp, coring tomatoes, segmenting citrus. The kind of detail work where your thumb does as much guiding as the blade, and the cutting board barely comes into play. Paring knives come in 3 distinct shapes, and each one solves a slightly different problem. The spear point looks like a miniature chef's knife, and is the most versatile of the 3. The sheep's foot has a perfectly straight edge with a blunt, rounded tip, like a tiny santoku, giving you full board contact for controlled straight cuts. That blunt tip has a history. Sheep's foot blades were originally designed for farmers and sailors who needed a knife that could not accidentally stab livestock or puncture a sail while working in tight conditions. Then there is the bird's beak, sometimes called a tourne knife. It has a short, concave blade that curves inward like a talon. This shape was designed for carving curved surfaces, and it is the knife behind the classic French tourne cut, the precise 7-sided barrel shape that has frustrated generations of culinary students. It also happens to be one of the best tools for peeling round fruit, because the inward curve naturally follows the shape of the produce. The Japanese equivalent of the paring knife is called a petty knife and tends to run slightly longer, bridging the gap between a Western paring knife and a small utility blade. The paring knife is all about precision on small things. But the next knife solves a problem that precision alone cannot fix. The bread knife works because of simple physics. Its serrated teeth concentrate cutting force at tiny points, biting through a hard crust with almost no downward pressure, while the smooth valleys between the teeth barely touch the food at all. A straight blade requires you to press down, and that pressure is exactly what crushes the soft interior of a loaf. The serrations do the work gently, so you do not have to push. The invention story is messier than the internet usually tells it. Nearly every source credits a man named Joseph Burns of Syracuse, New York, who filed a patent in 1919 for a blade with scalloped edges angled in opposite directions. But the deeper historical record points to an Ohio machinist named Russ Christie, who patented and specifically named a serrated bread knife in 1889, roughly 3 decades earlier. There is also a German cutlery firm that claimed serrated knife production from around the same period. The honest answer is that several people arrived at the idea independently around the same time, but Christie's 1889 patent appears to be the earliest one on record. Here is the counterintuitive part about serrated knives. They stay sharp, far longer than straight-edged blades, because the pointed teeth do most of the actual cutting, while the recessed scallops between them barely make contact with the cutting board. A quality bread knife can go a decade or more without needing any attention at all. But when it finally does go dull, each individual serration has to be ground with a small tapered rod, one by one, which is so tedious that most people simply buy a replacement. One more thing worth knowing: the bread knife is also one of the best tomato knives you will ever use. Those serrations grip the slippery skin perfectly, where a smooth blade would just slide right across the surface and go nowhere. A bread knife lets you cut through a crust without pressing down. But when you are working around the skeleton of an animal, you need a blade that actually bends with the bone. The boning knife has a narrow, stiff blade, typically 5 to 7 inches long, designed to work close to joints and connective tissue when breaking down larger cuts of meat and poultry. The fillet knife looks similar at first glance, but is built around a completely different idea. It is thinner and highly flexible, with a gentle upward curve that lets the entire blade bend and follow the backbone and ribcage of a fish, hugging the skeleton to peel off clean fillets with as little wasted flesh as possible. The Japanese version of the boning knife, the honesuki, takes the concept even further. It is a stiff, triangular blade considered by many to be the best chicken-breaking knife in the world, designed so you can work a whole bird down to pieces using a single tool. The difference between a boning knife and a fillet knife comes down to one word, and that word is flexibility. A boning knife is rigid enough to push through a chicken thigh joint without buckling. A fillet knife is soft enough to follow a trout's spine like a ribbon. Use the wrong one, and you will immediately understand why both exist. A floppy fillet knife cannot handle the resistance of a chicken joint, and a stiff boning knife cannot trace the delicate curves of a fish skeleton without leaving half the meat behind. A fillet knife follows the skeleton, but once the meat is off the bone, you need a different blade entirely to slice it cleanly. The carving knife is long, usually 10 to 14 inches, and deliberately thin. That length is the whole point. To cut a clean slice of roast beef or turkey breast, you want to draw the blade through the meat in a single smooth stroke, rather than sawing back and forth, which tears the muscle fibers and shreds the texture. The general rule is that the knife should always be longer than whatever you are slicing. Many carving knives also carry a row of oval scallops along the blade, called a Granton edge, originally patented in 1928 by a company in Sheffield, England. Those scallops create small air pockets that reduce the suction between the blade and moist meat, so each slice releases cleanly instead of sticking to the steel and folding over on itself. It is a small design detail that makes a surprisingly big difference when you are standing over a holiday roast with family waiting. A common mistake is reaching for a serrated bread knife to slice cooked meat. The serrated teeth tear soft flesh, rather than cutting through it cleanly. Bread knives are for crusts. Carving knives are for everything after. And finally, the single most important thing about any knife in your kitchen has nothing to do with which one you choose. It has to do with how you treat it. Putting a knife in the dishwasher is the fastest way to ruin any blade. The heat, The harsh alkaline detergent and the rattling against other utensils will dull, pit, and corrode even stainless steel over time. Hand wash it, dry it immediately, and put it away. Tossing knives loose into a kitchen drawer is nearly as bad. The edges knock against other metal and chip, and your fingers pay the price when you reach in without looking. The second mistake most people make is ignoring that steel rod sitting in the knife block. That rod is a honing steel, and it does not sharpen anything. It straightens the microscopic bends along the edge that form during normal cutting. Run your knife along it roughly once a week. Actual sharpening, which removes metal and rebuilds the edge from scratch, only needs to happen once or twice a year. And never cut on a glass cutting board, a stone countertop, or a ceramic plate. Those materials are harder than the blade itself and will flatten the edge in a single meal. Use a wooden board or soft plastic instead. A sharp knife on a wooden cutting board is genuinely safer than a dull knife on anything, because a dull edge requires more force to cut and is far more likely to slip off the food and straight into your hand. That is the real wrong knife problem in most kitchens. Not the wrong type, just the wrong edge.